Before the billion-dollar resorts, the Cirque shows, and the Instagram influencers, there was the mob. Weapons in one hand, blueprints in the other. Las Vegas did not run on dreams, but rather on deals made in back rooms, bodies buried in the desert, and cash that never made it to the bank. Okay, hello and welcome. I hope we're all well. Can't complain on this. Actually, yes, I can. I busted my lip with my toothbrush last night, like right here, and it really hurts to talk and it's really swollen. So if I look like I actually have lips in this video, that is why. Today's story is such a fascinating one. If you have ever been to Vegas, particularly around the 1950s or 60s, maybe you felt the mob's presence hanging in the air like smoke. Now, Sin City presently is the place where people go to let their vices wander, to let their bad habits breathe. But how did we get here? And how much influence did the mob really have? This is the tale of how early 1900s mobsters helped turn a stretch of Nevada into the most glittering playground in America. One casino and one crime at a time. Because what happened in Vegas never stayed in Vegas. It built an empire. I am truly so excited for this story. It's more of a fun one, which admittedly is pretty rare on this series. Las Vegas was founded around 1905 and started as a quaint little railroad town, an important stop for trains to stop and gather water, which Vegas had a lot of at the time. Now, I promise the whole story is not that boring. Meanwhile, at the same time, that early sort of Al Capone era of mobsters are being born. Of course, we know Al Capone himself, born in 1899. I have an entire video on him. A couple, actually. So this crop of mobsters are all coming of age during Prohibition, which obviously started in 1920. And they would go on to, for the most part, become bootleggers, rum runners. That's where the big money was at the time. And the mob always follows the money. And the speakeasies that they ran would often participate in illegal gambling. Remember that? It's important. But once Prohibition ended in 1933, all these mobsters are probably sitting around twiddling their thumbs thinking, what do we do now? They needed a new racket, something else to bring in some money. So only 2 years earlier, gambling had become legalized, but only under licensed entities in Nevada in 1931. Now, in the same year, 1931, work began on the Hoover Dam, and Las Vegas was the closest town to the build site. So with all of these men flooding there for the work building the dam, the population absolutely exploded. Men came to service the dam, and before too long, women came to, how do I put this? Service the workers. So secret saloons, brothels, etc. start popping up all over, and this gives Las Vegas a reputation as a recreational city. And so they start marketing themselves as a tourist destination. So we move to the 1940s. Las Vegas now has endless electricity thanks to the dam, and operators begin building these luxurious casino resorts with these beautiful, relatively new neon signs just south of Las Vegas, which would later become known as the Las Vegas Strip. But there was a problem. These properties obviously required a lot of money and marketing, and lenders wouldn't loan to casino projects. A, they were too new and risky, and B, for moral reasons. They didn't want to be associated with something as improper as gambling. If I had pearls on, I'd clutch them. And corporations were not even in the conversation because licensure was required for all shareholders, very expensive, and they either couldn't afford it or just didn't want to. So they needed people with lots of money, expertise in gambling, and who knew heavy gamblers and high rollers to bring into the city. And I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. They needed the mob. And freeze tag, I love this series because I learned so much. Like, I had no idea how much the mob was really involved in until doing this. Like, Las Vegas, they worked with the government a lot. We talked about that in the Operation Gladio video. Like, things you would never think about, and they were there the whole time in the shadows. It's just so interesting to me. In 1946, a very well-known bootlegger by the name of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel built the Flamingo Resort. Now, Bugsy despised that nickname, I know, but for the sake of simplicity and because that's what everyone knows him as, that is what we are going to call him. Sorry, bud. Apparently it was like an old-timey nickname for crazy, like you were crazy as a bedbug, so people called you Bugsy. And he was definitely, crazy. Now, he had moved to LA for a while years ago and became well known there for his access to vice. So he was one of the first ever celebrity gangsters. And I'm purposefully not going into a whole lot of detail because I do want to make an entire video on just him, but I'll tell you everything you need to know. Now, some people will have you believe that the Flamingo was all Bugsy's creation, and it was actually not. Billy Wilkerson, LA nightclub owner and publisher of the Hollywood Reporter newspaper, was the original developer, and he gave it the name Flamingo. Now, some sources say that he simply ran out of funding. Others say that he was forced out of the project and went into hiding. Either way, Bugsy took over and finished the construction. So now in 1946, we have the first mob-run casino in Las Vegas, and the Flamingo was a way for Bugsy to rebrand himself as a legitimate businessman. When the Flamingo opened in December 1946, the opening event was huge. Lots of celebrities came. It was a big deal, but it struggled because A, the hotel portion of the resort was not yet finished, and a lot of casinos were in resorts. B, these casino resorts were essentially a brand new concept at the time. And there were multiple businesses all on one property, so you needed people to run the hotel, run the casino, book entertainment, run the kitchen, etc. It was really complex and complicated, is what I'm getting at. So part of the struggle was the simple fact that this had never really been done before. So 2 weeks after opening, the Flamingo's gaming tables had already lost $275,000, and Bugsy was pissed. So he shut it all down in February, then he finished the hotel, hired a publicist, and the Flamingo reopened on March 1st, so just a couple-ish weeks after shutting down. They brought in mob bosses with gambling expertise to run the casino portion, and what do we think happened? The Flamingo started thriving. But of course, things can never go well for too long because the original budget for the Flamingo was $1.2 million, but under Bugsy, it shot up to $6 million. And the mob were convinced that Bugsy had embezzled about $1 million of that money, so he was taken out on June 20th, 1947. Which is only 3-ish months after the Flamingo reopened. And allegedly, only minutes later, 3 associates of notorious mobster Meyer Lansky entered the Flamingo and announced that they were in charge. Now, word travels fast in the underworld, and so when these other former bootleggers heard about Las Vegas, they knew that this was their next big opportunity. And soon enough, tons of mobsters are flooding Las Vegas looking to own a piece of the strip themselves. Morris, aka Mo Dalitz, was also a bootlegger in the 20s where he was in a gang, then he went to war in the 40s. Then afterwards, he also traveled to Las Vegas looking for his chance. He and 2 mob associates took over construction of the Desert Inn in 1950, and Mo really poured himself into not only gambling, but also literally building Las Vegas. He was one of the 4 founders of Las Vegas Country Club. He helped build residential communities and housing. He built the first golf course there. He supported countless charities. The list goes on. He also helped secure a $1 million loan from the Teamsters Union to build Sunrise Hospital. And we've talked about the Teamsters before, but this was a union of mainly transportation workers that were under mob control. But this really set the stage for more Teamsters loans down the road, which we will get to. Now, alongside the Desert Inn, Mo also funded and helped run 2 other casinos, the Stardust and the Showboat. And he would continue to develop modern Las Vegas, even earning himself the nickname Mr. Las Vegas. But the Stardust in particular would later become synonymous with mob schemes. Now, the 50s were known as the golden age of Las Vegas. The Sahara and Sands resorts both opened, both having mob ties. And the Cobra Room at the Sands was essentially Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack's playground. And I have an entire video on Frank Sinatra and his alleged mob connections, so highly recommend watching that. Of course I do, it's my video. Now at this point, Frank's career had declined a bit like we talked about in that video, so only mob-owned casinos would really have him. But once he started in Vegas and formed the Rat Pack, he was back on top, and they absolutely ran the Vegas Strip. So in 1955, the Riviera is finished, and this is basically the culmination of the mob's influence. They now own a good chunk of the big resorts. So now the mob have a massive presence in Las Vegas, and someone with alleged connections is their biggest headliner. And lots of people would later say that Vegas was just better back then, that the mob brought class and elegance to the place and kept the city nice and shiny. Of course, all of that is debatable, but anyway. It was apparently easier to win at casinos back then too, because mob bosses already had more money than they knew how to spend, so they could let some trickle out. Not too much, but some. And they had Frank Sinatra. Like, period. Need I say more? But of course, none of that could last. In the 50s, the Senate started a special investigation into organized crime, and no surprise, they came down hard on Nevada. They threatened to ban gambling, the state's biggest moneymaker, so Nevada had to get real strict about who they gave gaming licenses to. And in 1959, Nevada creates the Gaming Commission, essentially the authority on licensing matters. And they create the Black Book, a list of known criminals who are absolutely not allowed a license. Meaning that obviously these guys can't run casinos. So now it is incredibly difficult for the mob to maintain control, but they are very good at adapting. So they start to practice something called shadow ownership, aka having a frontman who is licensed but is also funded by and essentially a puppet for the mob. At this point, there's no telling how many resort managers were actually mob fronts, and there's no way to tell. Now we move to the 60s. The mob need even more money to pour into even more projects in Las Vegas, and this is where the Teamsters Union comes back into play. The union had a pension fund to provide retirement benefits to members and their families, but the mob used this fund as their own bank, taking money when they needed it and giving it when they had it. They used it to launder their cash and further develop Las Vegas at the same time. Pretty convenient. Can't do lipstick today because there is an open wound on my lip, so... In 1966, Caesar's Palace was built with Teamsters funding, and this was the first mega resort, so this was a big deal. Okay, freeze tag, you know how Celine Dion performs there a lot? Did you know that this is so unrelated to the story, but that room that she sings in, I think they call it the Coliseum, was specifically designed for her voice, like her specific voice. I thought that was crazy. Anyway, in 1967, Nevada passed the Corporate Gaming Act, and this was the beginning of the end. Because the primary goal was to allow corporations to own and operate casinos. Because remember, all shareholders were required to get a license, which was very expensive. But this act removed that requirement completely, which would reshape the city's entire landscape. So now there is a building boom happening with corporate funding, and the mob is slowly being priced out. As much money as they have, they cannot compete with actual billionaires. In 1968, billionaire Howard Hughes took over the Sands, and this majorly pissed off one of Vegas's biggest attractions, Frank Sinatra. At one point when Frank was heavily inebriated, the casino refused to extend his credit, so he drove a golf cart through the window. Then apparently a supervisor came, they got into it, he decked Frank in the face, chipped his tooth, and Frank Sinatra never played the Sands again. And this was a big deal because the Sands was synonymous with Frank Sinatra. He played there all the time. But again, now the entire culture of Las Vegas is changing. So at this point, the mob are trying to hang on to any power that they have left. They decide that if corporations are going to start snatching up all of Las Vegas, no problem. They'll just become one. So they use the Teamsters Fund once again to invest in an existing corporation, ARG Enterprises, aka Argent, aka Alan R. Glick, a San Diego real estate investor. And through Argent, with Alan as the frontman, the mob snatched up the Marina, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Stardust. I believe the Stardust had been sold at this point, but now they have it back. So they sent pro sports gambler Frank Lefty Rosenthal to manage the Stardust and oversee the other 3. Now they also sent Tony the Ant Spilotro, an enforcer, aka murderer, for when things hit the fan, and this guy was brutal. Now, if you have seen the 1995 classic film Casino, this is where that takes place. Casino is actually about Frank and Tony and the Stardust, and it's also said to be pretty accurate, so highly recommend. I love that movie. I'm not a huge movie person, but I could watch Casino all day, every day, never get bored. But the one thing the mob doesn't like is attention, and Tony Spilotro certainly brought a lot of attention. Newspapers were covering his various killings, even making fun of him at times, and soon mob casinos came under investigation of the FBI. Wiretaps were placed in casinos, and they were, of course, very telling. In 1979, the FBI learned all about shadow ownership and skimming operations. So skimming is how the mob would embezzle money from their casinos, because as much as they were bringing in, they were apparently never satisfied. So the customer's money would be brought into the back room where no one is ever allowed, and before it could be counted, the mob would go in and take their cut. Or sometimes they would falsify their earnings, or they would get really creative and stage robberies. So that is where they're getting the real big money. In 1983, the FBI finally nabbed 15 Vegas mobsters on RICO, aka racketeering charges, ending Argent completely and placing a good chunk of them in the Black Book, thus ending mob-owned casinos. Tony Spilotro continued with his extortion, robberies, and being a general nuisance until he and his brother were found in a cornfield, beaten nearly to death and buried alive. In the 90s, Vegas started putting on these big events around demolishing mob casinos. They treated it like a party or a fireworks show every time, with commentators, countdowns, and elaborate displays. And so beneath the neon glow and the ringing slot machines, the mob lost all grip on Sin City. The desert no longer answered to the underworld. And that is all I have for today. I've always wanted to go to Vegas, but I also feel like it would be sensory hell. This seems like a lot, you know, but I also feel like I should go at least once in my life just to see what they got going on. Actually, scratch that. I would give an arm. I would probably give both arms to go to the mob museum there. And also the Neon Museum, because they have a lot of the signs from the resorts that were demolished. I think I could take or leave the rest, but those would be so cool, especially the mob museum. Anyway, I hope you liked my tale, and as always, if you have any story ideas, please feel free to comment them so I can see what you want to see, and with that, I will see you next week. Toodaloo!